The sun had barely begun its climb over the jagged peaks of the western horizon when Emily Taylor first noticed him. The horse, a dark bay stallion with a rippling mane and eyes that spoke of both fear and trust, limped awkwardly along the narrow trail that wound through the pine-scented canyon. She had been riding for hours, the wind whipping at her long hair, dust curling around her worn leather boots, when the sound of hooves, uneven and pained, reached her ears. Instinct told her to turn, to flee. After all, the wild horses of the territory were notorious for their temper and strength. But something in the stallion's gait, something in the desperate tilt of his head, made her stop. He was injured, she realized instantly. A deep gash ran along the side of his flank, blood darkening the winter-dry fur, and yet there was something in his eyes that spoke of helplessness rather than anger. Emily's heart ached. She had grown up on the edges of ranches and homesteads, her father a skilled horseman who had taught her that animals, like people, deserved compassion. Without thinking twice, she slid from her saddle, boots crunching on the rocky path, and approached him slowly, hands outstretched. "Easy, boy," she murmured, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and resolve. The horse flinched but did not bolt, his breath ragged. She crouched beside him, feeling the warmth of life despite the cold morning air. The wound was deep, likely the work of jagged rocks or perhaps a brush with an unseen predator, but it was clean enough that it could heal with care. "Come on," she whispered, pressing a hand to his flank. "I'll get you fixed up." Her own horse, a sturdy chestnut mare named Lark, nickered impatiently, but Emily ignored her. She had no choice but to help this creature. And there was something in the stallion's gaze that made her heart tighten with unspoken recognition, as though fate had placed him in her path for a reason she could not yet understand. With the aid of a rope she fashioned from her saddle cinch, she guided the wounded stallion down the trail. Every step was a struggle. Rocks shifted underfoot, and the wind carried the sharp scent of pine resin and earth. Yet she pressed on, refusing to abandon him. As the sun climbed higher, the canyon widened into a narrow valley and she spotted something unexpected. Smoke curling above the treetops, faint but definite against the pale blue sky. A cabin, hidden from the main trail, tucked between evergreens and a craggy outcrop, almost invisible unless one knew where to look. Her heart skipped a beat. In these parts, cabins were rare and most were occupied by people who preferred isolation over company. She had heard rumors, settlers, hermits, or sometimes those hiding from the law, but she had never stumbled upon one herself. The stallion seemed to sense her relief, moving with a little more confidence as if the smell of human presence promised safety. Emily approached cautiously, calling out softly, "Hello? Anyone there?" Her voice was swallowed by the trees, yet she could hear movement inside, the creak of floorboards, a muted cough, and then the soft clatter of metal against wood. The door opened before she could knock and a man appeared. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a dust-covered coat and a hat pulled low over dark eyes. His expression was unreadable at first, then shifted to mild surprise and finally to curiosity. "You found my horse?" he asked, voice low but steady, eyes flicking past her to the wounded animal. "No," Emily said, a little breathless. "He was hurt, and I couldn't leave him." The man's gaze softened imperceptibly, though he did not step aside. "Then you're brave, or foolish," he said, and there was a rough humor in his tone. He gestured toward the cabin. "Come in, we'll see what can be done. It's not much, but it's dry, and I have a bit of balm and clean water." Emily led the stallion forward, careful not to startle him, and followed the man inside. The cabin smelled of pine smoke, worn leather, and something faintly sweet, the lingering scent of dried herbs. It was small but tidy, a single room with a stone fireplace, a wooden table scarred by years of use, and a corner stacked with barrels and supplies. As she tended to the horse, wrapping his wound with strips of cloth and applying a salve, the man watched silently, occasionally nodding. "Name's Colton," he said finally, as the horse flinched at the sting. "Colton Wade." "Emily Taylor," she replied, her hands steadying despite the tension. "I live down by the old mill. I was bringing Lark up to the pass when I found him." They worked in silence for a long while, the only sounds the soft murmur of wind through the pines and the occasional sigh of the injured stallion. Emily felt a strange sense of safety here, though the isolation was palpable. Something about Colton, his quiet strength, the way his hands moved confidently as if every motion had a purpose, made her relax, even in this remote corner of the wilderness. Finally, the horse settled, and Emily stepped back, brushing her hands on her trousers. He'll need rest, and more care than I can give him out there. She looked at Colton. He needs to stay here at least until he can walk without pain. Colton's eyes softened, and for a moment, the rough exterior melted away. Then he'll stay, and you'll stay too if you don't mind. Her heart fluttered, though she masked it with a small smile. I don't mind. The hours passed, the sun climbing higher, and then dipping toward evening. They worked together, fetching water, tending the horse, and eventually sharing a simple meal by the fire, dried beef, hard bread, and a cup of weak coffee. Conversation was sparse at first, but with each shared glance, each carefully spoken word, Emily felt a curiosity stirring. There was a secret here. She could sense it. Something hidden beneath Colton's quiet demeanor. Something in the way. His eyes lingered on the forest beyond the cabin, as if waiting for a ghost of the past to appear. Later, as twilight bled across the horizon, Emily moved to the window and looked out. The valley stretched endlessly, untouched and wild, a landscape of shadows and golden light. She felt a tug of something she could not name, a yearning for connection, for safety, for something more than the loneliness of frontier life. And then, without warning, she heard a noise, a muffled thump, a sound like a body against wood. She spun toward Colton. His face was unreadable, but his hand went to the rifle propped in the corner. "Don't move," he said softly, his voice low. "Stay behind me." Emily's pulse raced. What was that? Colton's eyes flicked toward the door, a shadow of tension crossing his features. Something. Someone. Maybe an old friend, maybe an old enemy. Either way, it's not here to talk. The night fell around them, dark and heavy, the wind whispering through the pines. Emily realized then that her arrival, and the arrival of the wounded horse, had brought more than just a moment of unexpected companionship. It had brought her to the edge of a secret, a danger, and perhaps a destiny she could never have imagined. And inside that cabin, amidst the warmth of firelight, the soft rustle of bandages and the quiet breathing of a recovering horse, Emily Taylor knew one thing for certain. Her life on the frontier had just changed forever. The injured horse had led her here, but what awaited inside the cabin would shock her beyond anything she could have imagined. The night deepened, swallowing the cabin in shadows that flickered and danced across the rough-hewn walls as the fire burned low. Emily sat close to the hearth, her knees drawn to her chest, listening to Colton move quietly about the room. The soft scrape of metal against wood, the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath his boots. Every sound was amplified in the silence of the wilderness. She could still feel the pulse of the stallion outside, a steady reminder that life had a way of demanding courage, even when the odds seemed impossible. Colton had been oddly distant since the noise at the door. He moved with a measured caution, checking locks, peering through windows, and adjusting the rifle in the corner with a familiarity that made Emily's stomach tighten. It was clear he knew something she did not, and yet he hadn't spoken. Not fully, not yet. She wanted to ask, but fear and curiosity tangled together in her throat, making words seem inadequate. Finally, he sat opposite her, leaning back against the wall, the rifle resting across his lap. "You need to eat," he said quietly, voice roughened by disuse, "and then get some sleep. It's a long night and the valley isn't forgiving." Emily shook her head, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I can't sleep. Not yet. There's something about this place. Something I can't explain. It feels alive, like it's holding its breath, waiting for something." Colton's eyes softened, though the shadow of something unspoken lingered. "You have a gift, Emily, or a curse. Not many notice the things this land whispers. Most people come through blind or they don't last long. You see more than most. The words made her heart skip. She didn't know whether to feel honored or afraid. The frontier had hardened her, yes, but to hear someone recognize the subtle truths hidden in the wind, the trees and the animals was both unsettling and comforting. She glanced toward the corner where the injured horse had settled. His breathing steady now, eyes half closed. Somehow his trust had become hers too, a bond forged in pain and compassion. There's more, Colton continued, his gaze distant, as if watching shadows only he could see. About this cabin, about why I'm here, and about who comes through that door. He hesitated, running a hand over the scar that trailed along his jaw, faint under the flickering firelight. It's not just me hiding from the world. There are things, people, you can't imagine in these parts. Things that don't forgive easily. Emily felt a shiver crawl up her spine. She wanted to press him for details, to demand the truth. But something in his tone told her that patience and trust would reveal more than insistence ever could. Instead, she let silence stretch between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the pine branches and carrying a chill that seeped through the wooden walls. Emily wrapped her shawl tighter, eyes tracing the shadows on the far wall. She could almost feel the presence of someone, or something, moving just beyond sight, in the spaces where the firelight did not reach. Every instinct she had learned on the frontier screamed caution, yet her curiosity burned hotter. She could not leave. Not now. Not when the stallion's eyes had pleaded for her help and this cabin held mysteries that tugged at her heart. As the night wore on, Colton finally broke the silence again, softer this time. You have to know. What happened to my family? Why I stay here isolated? It isn't just a cabin. It's a sanctuary, yes, but also a trap. And now with you here, it's complicated. Emily leaned forward instinctively, drawn to the hint of vulnerability in his voice. I'm not going anywhere, she said, her words firm even as her heart raced. I've seen too much to turn back. And besides, you saved me from the cold pass earlier this week. Maybe we're supposed to face it together. Colton studied her, those dark eyes unflinching. Then slowly he nodded. Maybe we are, he whispered, almost to himself. There was a tension in the air, electric and fragile like the first thin crack of lightning across a summer sky. The fire dwindled to embers, and Emily's eyes drifted toward the window. Moonlight spilled into the cabin, illuminating faint footprints in the snow outside. Not just her own or the horses, but others, older, partially hidden. A prickling sensation rose along her spine. Someone else has been here, she murmured. Colton stiffened. Then it's time you see why I never let anyone close. It isn't safe. Not for strangers. Not for anyone. He rose, moving to a small cabinet by the wall, and pulled out a worn satchel. He set it on the table, opening it to reveal letters, a tarnished locket, and a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Emily's breath caught as she watched. These are my past, Colton said quietly, almost reverently. My family, my friends, the debts and enemies that follow me. It's why I live alone, why I keep to this cabin. And now with you, I don't know how to explain it, but I can't turn back. Not when you're here. Emily felt her chest tighten. The frontier had taught her many things. Endurance, resilience, courage. But she had never encountered a heart so raw, so fiercely protective, yet so broken by the weight of secrets and regret. She wanted to reach out, to touch the frail line of hope she saw flicker in his eyes, but fear whispered caution. Then, almost imperceptibly, a soft whinny came from the corner. The stallion lifted his head, ears twitching. He moved closer to Emily, nuzzling her hand as if sensing her unease. He trusts you, Colton said, voice quiet. And if he does, maybe I can too. Emily smiled faintly, warmth spreading through her despite the chill. Then maybe we can help each other, she said. Heal what's broken. Find something worth fighting for. Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying the faint scent of smoke from a distant fire. It was subtle, almost ghostly, but enough to remind them that the world beyond the cabin was alive, dangerous, and unpredictable. The frontier had a way of testing hearts and courage, and Emily felt the weight of it pressing close. But she also felt a strange exhilaration, a sense that destiny had led her here, not by chance but by necessity. Colton finally allowed a small smile, rare and fleeting, to touch his lips. Maybe. You're right, he said. Maybe together we can face it. But you need to understand, it won't be easy. The valley doesn't forgive mistakes, the past doesn't forget, and some secrets are better left buried. Emily's gaze met his, unwavering. Then we'll uncover them, she said, her voice steady though her heart raced. Whatever it takes. We survive. We protect what matters. And maybe, we find something more than just survival. The fire had faded to glowing embers, the shadows stretching long and deep across the cabin floor. Emily felt a strange stillness, as if the land itself held its breath, waiting to see what they would do next. The injured horse shifted in his stall, a reminder that healing, courage, and trust were not given lightly on the frontier. They had to be earned. And sometimes they were found in the most unexpected of places. And for the first time since the horse had stumbled into her path, Emily felt the stirrings of hope, fragile and tender, that perhaps she had finally found a place where she belonged. Not just in the wilderness, but in the fragile, flickering connection she shared with Colton. She would soon learn that the cabin's secrets were darker than she could imagine, that danger and romance would collide in ways that tested every ounce of her courage, and that survival on the frontier was never just about enduring the elements. It was about facing the truths hidden in human hearts. Dawn broke slowly over the valley, spilling pale light across the frost-tipped pines and jagged cliffs. Emily woke to the soft nicker of the stallion, who had shifted to stand near the cabin door, ears twitching, nostrils flaring. Outside, the wind carried the crisp scent of pine, snow, and damp earth, mingling with a faint trace of smoke from a distant fire. She rose carefully, muscles stiff from a restless night, and pulled on her worn coat, brushing hair from her face as she stepped toward the corner where Colton stirred. He was already awake, standing near the small window, his profile outlined against the pale light. His dark eyes scanned the horizon with the same alertness she had seen the night before, a vigilance born not just of isolation, but of experience, of loss, and of things he could not speak aloud. She watched him silently, feeling a strange ache in her chest, a mixture of admiration, curiosity, and something she could not name yet. The pull of a man shaped by pain and resilience, whose life had been hardened by secrets she had only begun to glimpse. He's restless, she said softly, nodding toward the stallion. And so are we, I think. Colton's gaze flicked toward her, faint shadow of a smile touching his lips. Restless for good reason, he murmured. The valley doesn't sleep easy, and neither do those who live in it. There's more than wolves and wind out there. Emily's stomach tightened. The words were not a warning. They were a promise. She knew the frontier carried dangers, rustlers, outlaws, harsh weather. But Colton's tone hinted at something deeper, more personal, more dangerous than she had yet imagined. She moved closer, adjusting the makeshift bandages on the stallion's flank, feeling the warmth of his body through the thick winter coat. Despite his injury, there was a strength in him, a defiance that mirrored Colton's own. We should move him to the barn, Colton said after a long pause, breaking the silence. It's safer, warmer, and we can tend to him properly. I'll need your help. Some things are too much for one person, even with courage. Emily nodded, silently grateful for the opportunity to act rather than wait. Together, they guided the stallion out into the morning chill, the crunch of snow under their boots echoing across the valley. Colton moved with an efficiency that belied the weight of his past, every motion deliberate and practiced. Emily found herself watching him closely, her admiration growing not just for his skill but for the quiet strength that radiated from him. She could sense the scars beneath the surface, the loss, the battles the trust betrayed, yet here he was, willing to extend even a fragment of that trust to her. The barn was small, sturdy and scented with hay and wood smoke. Colton guided the stallion inside, gently removing the rope and letting him settle on the straw. He'll be safe here, he said. And if he trusts you, that's a good sign. Animals don't lie. Emily smiled faintly, running her hand along the horse's neck. Then maybe I can learn from him. About patience, about trust, about surviving without losing yourself. Colton's eyes met hers, and for a long moment the cabin, the valley, and even the distant dangers seemed to fade. There was a connection here, unspoken yet undeniable. A fragile bridge formed from shared responsibility, mutual respect, and the unspoken acknowledgement of loneliness tempered by courage. But the peace was fleeting. As they returned to the cabin, a movement caught Emily's eye, a shadow slipping between the trees at the edge of the clearing. She froze, heartbeat quickening. Did you see that? she whispered. Colton's hand went to the rifle again, his expression darkening. Yes, someone's been watching us. For days, maybe weeks. The cabin isn't as isolated as I thought. Fear mingled with excitement. A dangerous combination that made Emily's pulse race. The frontier was unforgiving, and she had always known that danger was part of life here. But the realization that someone was observing them, tracking them, brought the reality crashing closer. Who would be out here? She asked, voice barely audible. Colton shook his head, eyes scanning the tree line. Could be rustlers, bounty hunters, or someone from my past. People with grudges. People who never forgive. And sometimes, people who won't hesitate to take what isn't theirs. Emily swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the fragility of safety, of trust, and of the tenuous peace they had found. Yet there was a thrill in the danger, a sharp edge that made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. She realized that her life had been a series of careful calculations, small victories and cautious steps, but here, in this wild valley with Colton and the injured stallion, everything felt real, immediate, and necessary. They spent the rest of the day preparing for the unknown. Colton reinforced the cabin's weak points, checking windows, doors, and even the trap door leading to a small cellar. Emily learned quickly, her hands steady as she hammered, tied, and secured, following Colton's instructions with a focus born of necessity. Each motion brought them closer, not just in cooperation, but in understanding the quiet intimacy of two people facing danger together, learning to rely on one another in a world that demanded vigilance and courage. As evening fell, the valley painted in shades of amber and violet. Colton finally spoke again, softer now, almost confiding. Emily, there's more you should know. About me, about why I live here, about the shadows that follow. He hesitated, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down. My family. They were murdered. Stolen from me by people who wanted everything I had. Since then, I've kept to myself. The cabin. It's a sanctuary, but it's also a tomb for memories I can't let go of. Emily felt the depth of his pain, a raw, palpable ache that mirrored the injury she had seen in the stallion. I'm sorry, she said quietly, reaching out, her hand brushing his. But maybe you don't have to carry it alone anymore. Maybe together we can face it. Colton's eyes softened, the rough exterior cracking just enough for her to see the vulnerability beneath. Maybe, you're right, he said, almost a whisper. But you have to understand, the valley is unforgiving. The past doesn't stay buried, and some secrets can destroy everything if you're not careful. Emily nodded, determination hardening within her. She had faced harsh winters, blistering deserts, and the harsh judgment of townspeople before. The frontier had taught her survival, endurance, and courage. Now she would learn to face secrets, danger, and matters of the heart, all entwined in ways she could not yet foresee. As night descended, they sat by the fire once more, the glow illuminating their faces, the cabin filled with the quiet rhythm of trust and shared resolve. Outside, the shadows moved with a life of their own, a reminder that danger, mystery, and the promise of adventure were never far away in the Wild West. And Emily understood then that her journey, from a simple ride through the canyon to a cabin of secrets, from helping a wounded stallion to forming a bond with a man haunted by loss, was only beginning. The frontier had tested her in the past, but now it demanded more. Courage, resilience, and the willingness to trust when every instinct screamed caution. And deep in her heart, she knew. The secrets within the cabin, the danger lurking in the shadows, and the man beside her would change her life forever. The first light of dawn crept slowly over the horizon, touching the valley with pale gold, and painting the frost on the pine needles with a delicate shimmer. Emily rose before Colton, moving quietly across the cabin floor, careful not to wake him. She felt the weight of the previous days pressing against her. The stallion's injury, the shadows in the trees, Colton's unspoken secrets. Yet beneath that weight was a strange exhilaration, a sense that she was finally alive in ways the bustling towns, dusty trails, and lonely mills of her past had never allowed. Outside, the air was sharp, biting at her cheeks and filling her lungs with icy clarity. The stallion was already restless, pawing at the ground, tossing his head and letting out soft, anxious whinnies. Emily knelt beside him, running her gloved hands over his warm flank, still tender from the wound. We'll get through this, she murmured, her voice a mixture of reassurance and determination. We'll survive and you'll walk again without fear. Colton emerged from the cabin moments later, his coat dusted with frost, rifle slung over his shoulder. His eyes were sharp, scanning the tree line as he approached. Every movement controlled and deliberate. "Someone's been watching," he said quietly, his voice carrying that familiar undertone of danger. "And I don't think it's just a curious traveler." Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "How long?" she asked, steadying herself against the chill that ran down her spine. "Days," he admitted, jaw tight. "Maybe weeks. Whoever it is, they know this cabin exists. They know it hides things they want. And we're going to have to be ready." Preparation became their morning ritual. They reinforced windows with spare boards, secured the doors with extra latches, and stacked supplies near the fireplace for easy access. Every gesture between them was careful, deliberate, a silent choreography born of necessity. Yet even amid the tension, there were moments of quiet intimacy. The brush of hands when reaching for the same board, the exchange of a glance that spoke volumes without words. Emily noticed, more keenly than she expected, how Colton's presence settled something in her chest, a strange blend of safety and excitement, danger and desire. By midday, the valley was alive with the sounds of the wilderness, birds calling to one another across the pines, the wind rustling through the branches, and the distant howl of a coyote warning of intruders. Emily and Colton worked tirelessly, and yet the quiet moments between labor were filled with unspoken understanding. Colton finally allowed himself to share fragments of his past, stories of the family he had lost, of the lawmen who had failed him, of the outlaws who had stolen everything. Each revelation left Emily's heart aching, a mix of sorrow, admiration, and the faint spark of something deeper. "You carry so much pain," she said softly, as they rested beside the fire in the late afternoon, sipping from a tin cup of weak coffee. "And yet, you protect this valley, these animals, even me." "Why?" Colton's gaze lingered on hers, dark and unwavering. "Because some things are worth fighting for," he said quietly. "Even if the world's forgotten them, even if I've been burned before. And now, you're here."
"And I don't know if it's right to let anyone in."
"But I can't imagine facing the valley alone anymore." Her chest tightened at his words, the raw honesty cutting through the protective walls she had built around her own heart. She had come to the frontier seeking freedom, adventure, and purpose, but she hadn't anticipated this. The stirring of emotions so potent and dangerous in a place where survival demanded vigilance. As twilight approached, a sudden rustling outside froze them both. Emily's pulse quickened, and Colton was on his feet in an instant, rifle raised, eyes scanning the shadows. The wind carried whispers of movement, deliberate, careful, and cautious. Emily's breath hitched as a figure emerged from the tree line, tall, cloaked in shadow, but unmistakably human. Colton stepped protectively in front of her, voice low and steady. "Who's there?" The figure paused, then removed a hood, revealing the face of a man emaciated from months on the run. Eyes wild and desperate. "Please," he croaked. "I mean no harm. I need shelter. I've nowhere else to go." Emily's instincts wrestled with fear and compassion. The frontier had taught her harsh lessons. Trust was earned, not given. Yet something in the man's eyes struck her as honest, desperate, and human. "We can't turn him away," she whispered to Colton, her voice trembling with urgency and resolve. "He's injured. He's lost. He needs help." Colton hesitated, eyes narrowing, the tension palpable. "If we let him in, we risk everything. The valley doesn't forgive mistakes, and I don't trust him." Emily met his gaze, unwavering. "Sometimes trust has to be given before it's earned. If we don't, who knows what could happen to him out there." With a reluctant nod, Colton lowered the rifle. The man stepped closer, stumbling slightly over the frost-hardened earth. Inside, Emily led him to a corner by the fire, offering warmth, water, and a bit of bread. As he ate, his hands shook, his eyes darting nervously toward the cabin walls as though he half expected danger to emerge from the shadows. "Thank you," he whispered, voice barely audible. "I've been running for days, hiding from people who want me dead. I didn't think anyone would help." Emily's heart ached. She knew the valley was full of danger, betrayal, and death. Yet here she was, offering sanctuary despite the risks. She glanced at Colton, who stood by the doorway, rifle still in hand, watching the man with cautious eyes. The tension in his shoulders betrayed both his concern and his grudging acceptance. A silent acknowledgement that some risks, though dangerous, were necessary. As night fell, the three of them sat by the fire. The wind howled outside, carrying the scent of pine and snow, and the cabin seemed small, fragile yet defiant against the wilderness beyond. The stranger's presence brought a new energy, a mix of danger, mystery, and unexpected camaraderie, and Emily felt the stirrings of something she hadn't anticipated. The fragile hope that even amidst the harshest conditions, bonds could form, trust could grow, and hearts could heal. Yet the valley whispered warnings. The shadows pressed closer. Secrets waited to be uncovered, and the cabin's walls held truths that could unravel everything. Emily knew that the days ahead would test her courage, her heart, and her resolve in ways she had never imagined. And deep down she sensed that the arrival of this stranger, this lost soul seeking refuge, would force Colton and herself to confront the past, the present, and the dangerous possibilities of the future. And as she looked at the flickering firelight dancing in Colton's eyes, and the stranger's wary gaze, Emily understood the truth she had been avoiding. The frontier demanded more than survival. It demanded courage, compassion, and the willingness to face the darkest corners of human nature. And sometimes, the most unexpected connections could be the strongest lifeline of all. The valley awoke slowly beneath a sky streaked with silver and pale lavender, the frost melting from pine branches and the scent of damp earth rising from the thawing ground. Emily stirred, her mind heavy with the events of the previous night. The stranger, whose name she had learned was Thomas, slept fitfully by the fire, curled in a blanket and murmuring incoherently. Colton stood at the doorway, arms crossed, eyes narrowed against the morning light, scanning the distant tree line with the same vigilance he had maintained since she arrived. The tension in his shoulders was palpable. Every line of his body radiated caution, control, and the weight of secrets that refused to stay buried. Emily rose quietly and moved to the barn to check on the stallion. The animal shifted slightly as she entered, eyes brightening at her presence. She ran her hands along his flank, noting the slow improvement in the wound, and whispered to him softly, as if speaking aloud could speed his recovery. "You're stronger than you know," she murmured, brushing away a tuft of frost-laden hair. "And so are we. We'll make it through, together." Colton joined her, the crisp morning air swirling around them, carrying the scent of pine, snow, and the faint tang of iron from the horse's blood. "He's healing faster than I expected," he said, voice low, almost reluctant to speak too loudly. "Maybe. Your care is doing more than mine ever could. Animals respond to heart, Emily. They sense it, and so do people." Her chest warmed at his words, a subtle, thrilling connection sparking in the quiet of the barn. Yet the air between them was taut with unspoken questions. Colton's past lingered like a shadow. The stranger's arrival injected unease, and the valley outside promised both beauty and danger in equal measure. Emily felt the pull of this place, this man, and the fragile threads of trust and desire that wove between them, each one delicate, precious, and perilously close to snapping. As they led the stallion back toward the cabin, the valley echoed with sounds of life. Birds flitting between branches, the faint gurgle of a distant creek, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, yet beneath the serenity lurked a tense awareness. Every shadow could conceal danger. Every movement could signal pursuit, and the presence of Thomas, the stranger, complicated everything. Colton's expression hardened, eyes scanning each ridge, each clump of brush with a sharpness born of hard-earned survival instincts. Once inside, the trio settled into the cabin. Thomas had woken fully, his gaunt features revealing the toll of weeks spent on the run. "I didn't know anyone still cared," he said quietly, his voice edged with both gratitude and wariness. I thought the world had forgotten men like me, thieves, outlaws, men hunted for past sins." Emily's heart ached for him. She knew the frontier was merciless. Towns quick to condemn, lawmen slow to protect, and survival often dictated by cunning, strength, and luck rather than morality. "You're safe here," she assured him, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "For now. We can help each other survive. But you have to trust us." Colton's eyes flicked to hers, a mixture of caution and quiet approval. "Trust is earned," he said, tone sharp. "But for today, you have it. And you'd better hope it's enough." The day passed with uneasy labor and tentative conversation. Emily and Colton worked together, reinforcing the cabin's perimeter, stacking firewood and checking supplies while Thomas remained by the hearth, occasionally offering insight, warnings, and hints of knowledge only someone familiar with danger could possess. There were moments when the tension between Colton and Thomas became tangible. Silent challenges, measured glances, the unspoken awareness that each was assessing the other, gauging trust, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation that the valley promised. As night fell, the valley took on a different character. Shadows stretched long across the snow. The wind whispered ominously through the pines, and every distant sound seemed amplified, a reminder that the wilderness was alive and often hungry for mistakes. Emily sat by the fire, her hands cupped around a tin mug of weak coffee, watching the flickering flames illuminate Colton's tense profile and Thomas's haunted eyes. She felt the gravity of the moment pressing down on her, the delicate balance between safety and danger, trust and betrayal, survival and the fragile stirrings of emotion that had begun to entwine her heart with Colton's. Then, a sudden noise outside shattered the fragile calm, a branch snapping sharply, the unmistakable sound of deliberate footsteps crunching across the frost-covered ground. Emily's breath caught and she rose quickly, hands instinctively moving toward her belt, her pulse pounding. Colton was instantly at the doorway, rifle raised, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the cabin. Thomas froze, his body coiled with tension. But unlike Colton, his expression revealed fear mixed with knowledge, as if he understood exactly who, or what, approached. A shadow detached itself from the tree line, tall, deliberate, and moving with the quiet menace of someone who had stalked the land for far longer than they should have survived. The firelight revealed a face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, eyes cold, calculating and unyielding. Emily's stomach lurched. She knew at that moment that the valley's dangers were no longer abstract, no longer whispers in the wind. They had arrived at her doorstep, and the fragile sanctuary of the cabin was about to be tested in ways none of them could have anticipated. Colton's voice was steady but low, carrying authority and warning. "Identify yourself." The figure paused, the wind tugging at his coat and hat, and then spoke, voice rough, deliberate, carrying the weight of lawlessness and vengeance. "I've been waiting," he said. "For men who think they can hide, for women who meddle where they shouldn't. The valley remembers everything, and it doesn't forgive." Emily's heart raced, adrenaline surging through her veins. She stepped closer to Colton instinctively, the warmth of his presence a grounding force amidst the fear, the unknown, and the thrill of imminent danger. Thomas shifted uneasily, his hands unconsciously moving toward his hidden belt as if prepared for a confrontation born of desperation, survival, and past sins. Colton's eyes narrowed, jaw tightening. "Then you've come to the wrong cabin," he said, voice low and dangerous. "We don't fear the valley, and we don't run from the past, not here, not ever." The air thickened, charged with unspoken threats, unresolved histories, and the collision of hearts and destinies that had begun when Emily found the injured stallion days before. She realized with a mixture of fear and exhilaration that this moment and this confrontation would define not just survival, but love, trust, and courage on the frontier. Outside, the wind whispered secrets of vengeance, desire, and danger. Inside, the cabin held its fragile fortress of hope, trust, and burgeoning connection. And Emily knew deep in her bones that nothing would ever be the same, that the coming hours would test every ounce of strength, every heartbeat, and every truth she had ever held about life, love, and survival in the unforgiving Wild West. The night pressed down on the valley like a living thing, heavy with the scent of pine, frost, and the faint tang of danger. The moon cast silvery streaks across the snow, turning every shadow into a living specter, every tree into a silent sentinel. Emily moved quietly inside the cabin, heart pounding, hands trembling just enough to remind her that the wilderness demanded vigilance at all times. Outside, the wind carried whispers or perhaps threats humbled across the frozen landscape. The figure they had glimpsed the previous evening lingered in the tree line, deliberate and patient, waiting for the right moment to strike. Colton paced near the doorway, rifle in hand, jaw set, every muscle taut. His eyes, dark and calculating, darted from shadow to shadow, reading the forest with the precision of a man who had survived betrayals, violence, and the unforgiving frontier. Beside him, Thomas shifted uneasily, his haunted gaze flickering between the cabin and the approaching figure. Every instinct honed for survival. Emily, in the center of it all, felt the fragile flame of courage flare within her. She had come to this remote valley seeking freedom, purpose, and perhaps a place to call home, but now she realized that the frontier demanded more than mere survival. It demanded the strength to confront the past, the resolve to face danger, and the willingness to stake one's heart on trust, courage, and love. "He's testing us," Colton murmured, voice low, eyes fixed on the dark shapes moving among the trees. He wants to see if we falter before he strikes. If he senses fear, he'll come in for blood. Emily swallowed hard, steadying her racing heart. Then we don't falter, she said firmly, her voice carrying a strange calm that surprised even her. We stand together. Whatever comes, we face it together. Colton's eyes softened briefly, catching the firelight, and Emily felt the tension between them shift, fragile yet undeniable. There was something in the way he looked at her, a recognition of shared courage, a spark of something more intimate than mere companionship, and the unspoken acknowledgement that hearts could survive, even in the shadow of danger. The cabin's quiet was shattered by the snap of a branch, loud and deliberate. The figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, lean, face obscured by a shadowed hat, eyes glinting with the cold light of vengeance. Emily's stomach tightened. Every fiber of her being screamed caution. But beneath it surged a strange, defiant thrill. She moved closer to Colton instinctively, feeling the strength of his presence anchor her. You shouldn't have come here, Colton called, voice steady and dangerous. This cabin doesn't belong to anyone who seeks only destruction. The man smiled thinly, the movement unsettling. I've come for what's mine, he said, voice like gravel. For debts owed long ago, for men who think they can hide, for a woman who meddles in matters bigger than she understands. Emily's breath caught. The danger was palpable, the stakes higher than anything she had imagined, but instead of fear, a sense of resolve blossomed inside her. A fierce recognition that she would not be passive, that she would not cower while the valley, Colton, and even the wounded stallion counted on her courage. With a sudden movement, the figure stepped closer and Colton leveled his rifle, every muscle coiled like a spring. Thomas moved too, hands brushing against concealed weapons ready to act. Emily, heart hammering, stepped forward, raising her voice in defiance. We are not afraid of the past or of you. We will protect this place and each other no matter the cost. For a long, tense moment, the world seemed suspended. The wind stilled. The trees held their breath, and even the stallion outside pawed at the ground, sensing the storm about to erupt. Then chaos broke loose. The man lunged with deliberate force, and the cabin erupted into a flurry of motion, rifles firing, footsteps scrambling, and the clash of human will against human will. Emily moved instinctively, using the cabin's narrow spaces to her advantage, keeping close to Colton, helping him maintain balance, moving supplies to block entrances and even striking when necessary. The fear that had gripped her earlier was replaced by a clarity born of necessity. This was no longer a test of survival alone. It was a test of heart, of courage, and of the trust that had begun to bind her to Colton and, strangely, to Thomas as well. Amid the chaos, Colton's voice broke through, low and commanding. Emily, stay close! Don't let him divide us. She nodded, keeping her focus, moving with precision despite the tremor in her hands. The confrontation felt eternal. Each second stretched taut, each heartbeat a drum signaling danger and defiance alike. Yet through the struggle she noticed something. The figure, though fierce and threatening, faltered at moments, uncertain of the bond between the three inside the cabin. They were united, not just by circumstance, but by trust, courage, and the flickering, fragile flame of human connection that the wilderness could neither snuff nor destroy. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only moments, the man retreated, recognizing the strength, resolve, and unyielding spirit of those within the cabin. He melted back into the trees, a shadow dissolving into the night, leaving the cabin trembling but intact, the firelight dancing across sweat-streaked faces, hearts racing, and the adrenaline slowly ebbing from their veins. Emily sank into a chair, hands trembling but proud. The stallion whinnied outside, restless yet alive, a mirror of the struggle they had endured together. Colton moved beside her, brushing a hand over her shoulder in quiet comfort. We survived, he murmured, voice rough with exhaustion and emotion. Not just the danger, but everything. Together, she met his eyes, and for the first time the tension, fear, and danger were replaced with something more profound, a sense of belonging, trust, and the stirring of love that had grown through shared peril and quiet understanding. Together, she repeated, her voice steady, though her heart still raced. Thomas, still wary, offered a faint, grateful smile. I owe you both my life, he said quietly, and I'll do whatever it takes to honor that debt. Emily looked around the cabin, the firelight warming the space despite the chill outside, and realized something profound. The frontier had tested her in ways she had never imagined, and through it all, she had discovered the strength of her own courage, the resilience of trust, and the unpredictable, breathtaking power of the human heart. She had come to this valley because of a wounded horse, but she stayed for the people, the bonds, and the possibility that love could thrive even in the harshest wilderness. Colton took her hand, squeezing gently, and she felt the truth of it in every fiber of her being. "We have a life to build here," he said softly, voice filled with promise. "Not just surviving, living together." Emily smiled, the first real unguarded smile in weeks. "Then we'll build it," she said. "No matter the storms, the shadows, or the dangers that come, we'll face them all, together." Outside, the valley whispered in the wind, a silent witness to courage, love, and the endurance of the human spirit. The cabin, small and fragile, stood as a fortress of hope and a testament to survival, trust, and the transformative power of connection. And for Emily, Colton, and even Thomas, the Wild West had revealed its harsh truths, its dangers, and its unexpected gift. And in the heart of the valley, they had discovered the most important truth of all, that even in the wilderness, hearts could heal, love could bloom, and courage could conquer the darkest of nights.